Alaska isn't just wilderness, it's a graveyard of secrets buried in endless snow. Out here, silence doesn't comfort you, it stalks you. People vanish without a trace, camps are found frozen in time, and sometimes voices rise from beneath the ice when no living soul should be speaking. Travelers whisper about cabins that appear where no cabin should be, lights hovering above rivers that lure you closer, and shapes in the tundra that follow faster than any machine can run. These are not campfire tales. These are the accounts of those who barely made it back alive, the ones who still wake screaming at night. 6 true stories from Alaska's countryside, each darker than the last. Listen carefully, because in Alaska, the scariest thing isn't what's out there in the cold. It's what's waiting for you to find it. I've lived in Alaska my entire life, and if there's one thing people don't understand unless they've been here, it's the silence. Out in the countryside, far from the cities, you get stretches of frozen earth so wide and desolate that you begin to feel like the whole planet quit making noise. At first it's peaceful, then it gets strange. I used to joke with friends that silence drives people mad before the cold does. After one hunting trip, I don't make that joke anymore. It was late September, just as the tundra was exchanging its greens for rust reds and browns. I was with 2 buddies, Tommy and Felix, heading deep into the country, maybe 60 miles outside Bethel. We were after moose, and we planned for a week-long trip. Supplies were loaded on 2 snow machines with sleds hitched to the back. We were ready for anything, at least we thought so. On the 3rd night, clouds strangled the moonlight, and the air turned oppressive. No owls, no cracking branches, no distant trickle of streams, just the heavy kind of dark that eats your flashlight beam. That's when we saw it. The outline of a cabin. It was tucked between leaning spruce trees, its roof bent like an old man's back. At first it looked like salvation, a break from our tents, a real structure to keep out the winds. But when we got closer, something was off. 2 things actually. First, it had no windows. Just 4 log walls, a low roof, and a door half rotted off its hinges. Second, there were no signs of use. No fire pit, no stacked wood, nothing. It was like the forest had grown it there just to mess with us. Tommy laughed it off. He was the hard guy, the skeptic. "Who the hell builds a place with no windows? Freaking vampires?" he said, kicking the door. It swung inward with a groan. The smell hit us like stale meat left too long outside, rancid and heavy. Felix gagged. "Maybe we stick to the tents," Felix muttered. But snow was spitting from the sky, and I didn't feel like waking up buried in it. So against my gut, I stepped in first. The air inside felt damp but weirdly warm, as if the walls sweated. I swept my flashlight around. Log walls, bare floorboards, nothing else. No chairs, no stove, no cot, just emptiness. And yet the stink clung to everything, like it was soaked into the grain. We figured, we'll stay one night, just keep warm and leave at first light. I'd regret that decision by midnight. That night I woke to noises. It wasn't wind, it wasn't branches, it was whispering, so faint I thought it was a dream. But as I shook myself awake, it grew sharper. Multiple voices, muffled, fast, right on the other side of the wall. I froze. Who the hell would be talking out here at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere? Tommy mumbled in his sleep, oblivious. Felix, though, he was sitting up in the dark, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. He heard it too. "Don't," he whispered, grabbing my sleeve when I started to rise. "Don't look outside." The tone in his voice rooted me in place. We sat like that for minutes, the whispers moving from one wall of the cabin to the next, circling us. Sometimes they sounded girlish, sometimes deeper, almost like men coughing words underwater, but I swear I caught my own name in there once, my own damn name. When the whispers finally stopped, I checked my watch, 4:12 a.m. For the last couple hours till dawn, none of us even blinked. In the gray morning light, the forest looked harmless again, just a cabin in the trees. Tommy laughed at us when we tried to explain, but Felix's face stayed pale. We packed up quickly, pretending nothing had happened, but as I was tying down gear on my sled, I noticed something on the cabin wall. Scratches, long vertical grooves, deep like someone dragged nails or claws down the logs. They hadn't been there the night before, or maybe we just hadn't seen them. Felix was already revving his snowmobile, and I didn't argue. We rode hard that day, putting as much ground between us and that cabin as possible. But here's the thing. Every single night after, it felt like something was following. Like once we stayed inside that place, we were marked. On the 5th night, it took another step closer to us. I'll end part 1 here. The next half is when things really plunged downhill. Sleepwalking, missing footprints, and what we finally saw when we dared to go back near the cabin. We had set up camp near a frozen stream, miles from that cursed cabin, and for once I thought maybe things were behind us. The sky was clear, the stars freakishly bright, like pinholes poked through the darkness. I even allowed myself to relax a little while cooking strips of dried caribou over the fire. But as the flames crackled and the smoke drifted up, I realized something awful. There were tracks leading straight into our camp. Not moose, not wolf, not even bear. They were footprints, human footprints, bare feet. The snow wasn't that deep, just a light crust over the soil, so the impressions were sharp. Long, narrow soles, toes spread like they'd been walking shoeless in the cold. The trail came out of the trees, circled Felix's tent twice, then vanished. We followed in the flashlight glow for a few yards until they just stopped. Like whoever it was simply melted into the ground. Tommy tried to play it off. Probably old, he muttered, but I could see the steam still curling faintly from where our own boots pressed the snow. These prints were just as fresh. That night, I could barely sleep, but even when I closed my eyes, it didn't save me. Around midnight, Tommy's voice jolted me awake, except he wasn't inside his tent anymore. I scrambled out to see him stumbling in the moonlight, barefoot, heading toward the tree line. His eyes were blank, his jaw slack. He was sleepwalking or something worse. Felix and I sprinted to grab him, dragging him back and shoving boots on his feet before frostbite set in. When he came to, he swore he'd dreamed of voices telling him to come see. Needless to say, none of us slept after that. By dawn, we were exhausted but determined. We decided to end the hunt right there and head home. The thing about deep wilderness, though, leaving isn't always simple. Whiteouts, busted gear, getting turned around, any of it can stop you cold, and that's exactly what happened. On the trail back, my snowmobile sputtered and coughed out, frozen fuel lines, dead in the middle of nowhere. Tommy and Felix circled back and tried warming it with a little stove, but nothing worked. Worse, the storm was rolling in fast, gray clouds swallowing the sky. We had only one option, find shelter until it passed. And just our luck. When we rode another half hour searching for cover, we saw it through the trees. That same cabin. Except, here's the thing. We'd traveled in the opposite direction of where we'd first seen it. Completely opposite. It shouldn't have been there, no matter how tired, no matter how lost. We all knew we weren't circling. The terrain was new, and yet there it stood, waiting. Tommy refused at first. Hell no, I'm not stepping back in that place. His eyes were bloodshot, voice on edge, but the wind had picked up, already biting through our coats. The snow stung like shards of glass. We weren't going to survive another night outside with no heat. Against every instinct screaming in my chest, we went back inside. It was darker this time, like the walls sucked in the light. Our lantern barely reached 5 feet. The stench had worsened too, sweet, rotting and suffocating. But the worst part was, it wasn't empty anymore. At the back of the cabin, stacked neatly like firewood, were shoes. Dozens of them. Old, new, some cracked with age, others still holding frozen slush inside. Men's, women's, kids. A pile of shoes all pointing toward the door. Felix muttered, "This ain't possible." His voice broke halfway through. We should have turned and run, but outside the storm howled so violently we wouldn't make it 3 miles, so we stayed. The lantern sputtered, shadows danced, and exhaustion pulled at us. Despite every nerve sparking in terror, my body eventually gave in. I drifted to sleep. I wish I hadn't. The dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream, started with silence. Then I was back at the wall, listening. The whispers weren't muffled anymore. They were clear, chattering, nonsense words mixed with things I couldn't mistake. My name, Felix's too, then laughing, dozens of voices laughing. I snapped awake, breath ragged, realizing it wasn't in my head. The voices were real. They were circling again outside the cabin, same as before. The pitch shifted, rising like a chant. I shook Felix. His face was wet, pale, trembling. "They keep calling me," he muttered. His fingernails had torn bloody crescents into his palms. Tommy was gone. We tore the cabin apart, shouting his name, until finally, I saw him flash by the cracked door frame. His silhouette wavered between the trunks. He was barefoot again, heading into the storm. We raced after him, snow whipping across our eyes, branches clawing at us. We lost him in minutes, completely vanished. His prints wandered into the woods, then disappeared mid-step like the others. Felix broke down right there, sobbing into his gloves. I tried to keep us together, tried to say we'd find him after the storm, but that was a lie. Deep down, I knew the countryside had taken him. By some miracle, the snowmobile started again the next morning. No repairs, no tinkering. It just roared back to life like nothing had happened. Felix and I rode until our hands blistered on the grips. We didn't stop till we reached the first stretch of road near town. Tommy was never found. No search party, no footprints tracked. Gone. And Felix? Well, it's been 2 years now. He doesn't live in Alaska anymore. Barely talks to me. But on the few times we do connect, I can see it in his eyes. He still hears them. The voices. Sometimes, when it's late and I can't sleep, I wonder about that cabin, the one with no windows. If I ever went back, would it still be standing, or would it just pop up somewhere else in the trees, waiting for the next lucky traveler? Sometimes on nights when the wind cuts low and the silence sets heavy, I swear I can hear the faintest whisper leaking through the walls of my own house. And when I do, I don't dare listen too closely, because I'm terrified of what name it might say next. When I tell people I grew up along the Kobuk River, most just nod politely, having no clue where in Alaska that really is. Truth is, you'd have to be stubborn or a little nuts to put roots out here. Winters are a punishment, summers are short, and the wolves don't fear people the way they should. But the river makes you stay. It carries life to the villages, fish to your nets, and stories to your ears. And along that winding river, one tale keeps circling back. One I learned the hard way, the story of the vanishing lights. It was the winter of 2015. I'd returned home from Anchorage to check on my grandmother. She lived just outside Shungnak, in a creaky cabin she refused to leave no matter how many times we urged her to move into town. "The land raised me, the land will bury me," she always said with a half smile. The first week back, I pulled nets under the river ice with a cousin. We'd laugh, swear, nearly freeze our fingers off, simple northern entertainment. But one evening as we trudged home, dragging a sled of frozen fish, something strange cut through the twilight sky. 3 glowing orbs drifted above the tree line to the north. Not planes, not satellites, too low, too deliberate. They pulsed faintly, like balloons of light rising and falling in invisible currents. My cousin froze mid-step, his breath puffing like smoke around his head. His face went pale. "You see them?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said. "What are they?" He shook his head slowly. Then he muttered something I'd never heard him use before. "They're not supposed to come this close." Before I could press, he yanked the sled and quickened his pace toward home. But that image burned into me. The orbs glowing softly, almost beautiful, like lanterns rising off the surface of the world. Later that night, I asked my grandmother about it. She didn't flinch, didn't laugh, just stirred her tea and muttered, "You stay away from those lights. They aren't for you." It reminded me of the kinds of warnings grandmothers everywhere give. Don't go out past dark, don't whistle at night, don't follow strange animals. But her face, the way her lips pressed thin and her gaze stayed rooted on the fire, it carried weight. Still, curiosity is poison. and I was already swallowed. The next evening I spotted them again, this time from my bedroom window, just past the bend in the river, faint but undeniable. My cousin avoided the topic entirely, and my grandmother refused to entertain my questions. So on the third evening, I strapped on snowshoes, packed a lantern, and told myself I was just going for a short walk, just close enough to see them better. The air that night was brittle, the kind that nips your lungs with each inhale. The snow crunched like glass beneath my steps, and ahead the lights pulsed quietly, unhurried, like they knew I'd follow. I walked maybe half an hour, and for the first time, the tree line broke. The river stretched wide under the moon, ice cracking and groaning beneath its white crust. And there, hovering just above the frozen water, the orbs swayed. 3 of them, gold-white, about the size of basketballs. One drifted low, nearly touching the ice. At that moment, every thought of balloons or drones or tricks of the sky vanished from me. These moved with intent, alive almost. They spun slowly in place, brightness flickering as though signaling to one another. Then, something terrifying. A faint figure, out on the ice just beyond the lights. At first I thought it was some unlucky hunter who'd wandered too far, but the longer I stared, the harder my stomach twisted. The shadow was off, its posture crooked, limb was wrong. Though it appeared human-sized, the arms hung low, too long, almost brushing its knees, and the head turned unnaturally smooth, side to side, like testing the air. I should have left then and there, but like an idiot I dug my feet in the snow and leaned closer. The orb split apart suddenly, 2 circling the figure, the third rising high overhead. In that silence, with my heart hammering, I realized the lights weren't floating harmlessly by, they were guiding the thing on the ice, drawing my attention toward it like a lure in a dark river. That's when my lantern flickered. I swore under my breath, smacking the side. The flame bounced back, dim but steady. But in that second of sputtering, I knew. That figure out on the river, it had turned toward me. Even from the distance, I felt its attention hit me like a blast of cold wind. The orbs pulsed harder, faster, the rhythm almost frantic. The figure began to move, legs sliding awkwardly, feet not so much stepping as dragging forward. That was enough. My curiosity shattered into raw survival instinct, and I bolted, crashing through the trees, gasping clouds into frozen air, snowshoes slamming ridges into the powder. Behind me, I swear the air itself buzzed with an unnatural hum, like the rattling of insects or electricity. The lights were following. The forest warped into one endless hallway of black and white, tree trunks stretching forever. Through it, those faint glows flickered between branches, keeping pace no matter how hard I ran. I remember falling once, knees biting into the crust of snow, and for a fleeting second hearing footsteps behind me, something heavy, too close. When I slammed through my grandmother's front door, I was half frozen, half numb, gasping like I'd run a marathon across tundra. The lights were gone, just darkness behind me. My grandmother didn't scold. She didn't even wait for me to explain. She grabbed a handful of ash from the fire pit, muttered something low and strange under her breath, and smeared the ash across the door frame. Her hands trembled the entire time. When I finally stammered questions, she only said this: "You don't look at them, you don't follow them, and if they know you saw, you never, ever let them cross your threshold." The next morning, I went back down to the riverbank in daylight, just to confirm. Maybe in the sunlight, it would all dissolve into a silly dream. But when I reached the bend in the Kobuk, I stopped dead. There in the snow, clear as my own prints, was a trail of long, crooked tracks, leading from the ice to the tree line, then stopping, vanishing right at the point I had turned to run. That was only the beginning. What happened 5 nights later made me believe my grandmother's warning far too late. For the next few days, I didn't dare leave the cabin after dark. I busied myself with chopping wood, mending nets for my grandmother, anything to keep my mind away from those lights and that night on the ice. But fear doesn't just fade, it festers. Especially when you hear noises you swear no one else hears. The fifth night, the silence broke. It was just after midnight when the fire had died down and the cabin sank into that suffocating stillness. A faint buzzing crawled in from outside, like a swarm of bees moving through the air. Only it was winter, and nothing stirred outside at those temperatures. My grandmother sat up instantly. Her eyes met mine across the tiny room. She knew. "They've come for you," she said quietly. Before I could even respond, the glow appeared through the frosted window. Not bright, not fiery, but soft, pulsing, unmistakable. One orb, then a second, then a third, hovering just on the far edge of the clearing. I scrambled to my boots, panic setting in, but her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "You don't open the door," she hissed. "No matter what, you hear me?" I nodded, throat too dry to speak. We sat there, staring through the cracks in the curtain. The lights swayed back and forth like they were searching. A dance, methodical, patient. Then came the knock. I swear my blood turned solid hearing it. A sharp rapping on the wooden door, 3 knocks, then silence, almost polite. My grandmother shook her head fiercely. "Not real," she whispered. "Never answer." But my body betrayed me. Every instinct screamed to do the opposite. Open it, check, see what it was. I bit down hard on my lip until I tasted iron, just to lock myself in place. The knocks came again, louder this time, then a voice. At first muffled, then clearer. It was my cousin's voice. "Let me in," it begged. "Please, it's freezing." My eyes darted to my grandmother, horrified, but she didn't flinch. "That's not him," she said. "He's safe in his home." The voice persisted, switching from my cousins to a woman I knew from town to someone else entirely. Familiar tones, lures meant to unlock human weakness. They cycled through voices until one stopped me cold. My own. "Open the door," it said outside. "It's safe now." The lights brightened, pressing closer to the cabin's walls, white glow bleeding through the window cracks onto the floorboards. The humming rose higher until it vibrated in my teeth. The door creaked under a push. My grandmother barked a word in Inupiaq I couldn't even repeat if I tried. She tossed more ash from the fire pit against the threshold, her hand steady despite the quake in her body. And for a while, it worked. The lights backed away, the buzzing softened. I thought it was over. But that's when we heard the window. A scraping noise against the frost, nails or claws, dragging lightly. I forced myself to look, and just beyond the glass, I saw a distorted face pressed up against the pane. Not a real face. A smudge of features stretched wrong, like a wet painting smeared with a thumb. The skin was pale gray, eyes too large, lips curving into something that only imitated a smile. And worse, the figure's breath fogged the inside of the glass for a moment. I stumbled backwards so fast I nearly knocked over the lantern. My grandmother hollered again in her native tongue, louder this time, pounding her fist against the door frame. The glow outside flickered rapidly, frantic like a string of strobe lights pulsing in pain. Then, nothing. Just as sudden as they came, the orbs winked out. Gone. The buzzing ceased. The figure's silhouette melted back into the night. Silence held the cabin like glue. For the next hour, neither of us moved, barely daring to breathe. By sunrise, the clearing looked undisturbed. No strange prints, no orb light, just a fresh layer of drifting snow. I wanted to believe it had all been some hallucination born from isolation and cold. But when I checked the window, the frost line was distinct, except for one patch where it had melted away in the shape of a palm. On the inside. I didn't sleep another proper night there. Within the week, I packed up and headed back to Anchorage. I told my grandmother I'd return in the spring. She only nodded like she already knew I was gone for good. Months later, I got a call from my cousin. My grandmother had passed quietly in her sleep. The land finally claimed her, just like she'd promised. But before the funeral, my cousin told me something strange. He said he'd gone to clean out her cabin, and on her bedside table he found an old, battered leather notebook. Inside, written in her careful scrawl, were dozens of entries going back decades. Notes on the orbs, warnings, names of villagers who'd never come home after chasing them downriver, and near the end, a chilling line written in her final days. If the lights find someone new, they stop coming for the old. I didn't know what to do with that. It's been years now. I live far from the Kobuk. I try to sleep. With the city hum, trains rattling, traffic buzzing outside, it comforts me, noise that erases silence. But sometimes, when it's very late, everything falls still. And in the corner of my small apartment, a faint hum rises in the floorboards, like insects, like electricity. And if I glance toward the window for just a second, I'll catch a pulse of white, faint, golden, patient, waiting. And every time I shut my eyes tight, because I know curiosity will kill me if I look too long. I used to think there was nothing in Alaska bigger, scarier, or more indifferent to human life than Denali itself. 6 million acres of wilderness, the tallest mountain in North America, and temperatures that'll break you just for stepping outside unprepared. Most folks only ever see it from a distance, postcards, guided tours, but I saw the mountain up close, too close. And somewhere on its slope, hidden by trees and fog, I found a place I should have never stepped into, the Silent Lodge. This was back in 2018 when I worked as a guide for tourists with more money than sense. A couple from Seattle had hired me to take them on a winter backcountry trek around Denali's southern foothills. They'd canceled last minute, spooked by a storm rolling in. I figured, why waste the prep? I went myself. People think guides are thrill seekers, but sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you chase quiet. With Anchorage always buzzing, Denali's silence called to me like medicine. So I strapped a pack on, pulled my sled, and went up into the folds of spruce and fir. The first 2 nights were perfect. Cold, yes, but crisp skies lit by the aurora. My campfire crackled under streaking green lights, and I felt almost cocky, like the mountain had accepted me. But on the 3rd morning, I found tracks. Not animal tracks, boots. At first I thought they were my own doubled back, but no. These trailed off deeper into woods where I hadn't stepped. What chilled me was how new they were. Perfect outlines in the powder, maybe a day old, leading due north. There weren't supposed to be others out here. This wasn't a public trail, so why did I feel like I was tailing someone? By dusk, fog rolled in heavy, the kind that bleeds the edges off reality. Trees softened into gray smudges, snow dulled, and I nearly lost my bearings. Just as panic started to gnaw, I spotted it, a shadow squat, sitting in fog, a building. It looked almost welcoming, an old mountain lodge, its peaked roof half buried in snow. It stood awkward in the woods, slanted with age, but my relief drowned out suspicion. Shelter, solid walls. The door was swollen in its frame, but with a firm shoulder it groaned open. The air inside hit me like a solid fist, cold, stale, and strangely hollow. I expected dust or mold, but there was nothing, just emptiness. The lodge was massive, bigger than I thought, 2 floors, maybe more, with a staircase dead center and a hall disappearing into darkness. I stomped my boots, shouting a nervous hello. The way my own voice came back to me froze me. It came back wrong. Not like an echo, more like another version of my voice, slightly delayed, slightly lower. Same words but heavier, like someone repeating me from deep inside the walls. That was the moment I should have left. Instead, I lit my lantern. I explored the ground floor first. Whatever this place had once been, time had erased most signs. A few broken chairs, a caved-in piano in the parlor, fireplace stone cracked like teeth. Not much else. But every few steps I heard it, my own movement bouncing back too quickly, too sharp. Something about the acoustics made every sound feel crowded. When I climbed the staircase, the air shifted, warmer. That made no sense in a place this abandoned. My lantern flame bent inward, like there was a faint draft drawing me deeper. The upstairs hallway stretched long, lined with closed doors. None had handles, just bare wooden slabs warped with age, and yet as I walked, I kept swearing one or two twitched open just a hair, like someone peering through a gap. The lodge was crowded in silence, heavy silence. By the time night hit, exhaustion forced me to stop exploring. I set up my sleeping bag by the old fireplace, keeping the lantern beside me. My gut told me camping outside sounded worse. The fog was thick, visibility gone, temperatures plummeting. Against reason, the lodge felt safer. But around midnight, the sounds started. It began subtly, wood creaking above, soft footsteps crossing a floor. I sat upright, knowing I was alone, heart beating into my throat. Then came whispers. At first, distant like from the upstairs hall. Whispers too low to make out, overlapping like two voices arguing behind a thin wall. I fumbled for my lantern, but when I held it up, something made my stomach knot. The flame bent again, not to a draft this time, but toward the staircase, toward the second floor. And the whispers grew louder. I should have bolted, but some sick part of me thought I could see what this was. So I lifted the lantern and crept up one wooden step at a time. About halfway up, the voices stopped, dead silent. That somehow was worse. At the top, the hall stretched wide, 12 or 13 warped doors staring at me. Every damn one of them rattled faintly, as though something inside wanted out. 1, 2, 3, all vibrating in place, not violently, but held shut by just enough force. My throat went sandpaper dry. My hands shook, my boots felt sunken into the boards. Then, all at once, the rattling stopped, and a door at the far end slowly, noiselessly, opened, just enough to show me what I wished to God I'd never seen. Through the crack, dimly lit by my own lantern glow, stood a figure, not solid, not transparent either. It was like fog pressed hard into the shape of a man. It had shoulders, arms, a face that quivered at the edges, and when it leaned, I realized it was me. My height, my build, but its face was stretched slack, mouth too wide, eyes empty sockets. It mimicked me, leaning just as I leaned, tilting exactly as I tilted. And then it smiled. With that expression locked on its melted features, the door slammed hard enough to rattle dust from the rafters. I didn't breathe, didn't move, until I felt heat at my ear, as if someone pressed close behind me. And I swear, clear as my own thought, I heard my voice whisper back from the black, "You're already inside too." I ran, not out the door, but deeper. Like a fool, I fled down the wrong hallway, doors lining either side, rattling all around. Every plank underfoot groaned as though feet matched mine step for step. I bolted blindly, praying for an exit. What I found instead was the lodge wanted me. I sprinted down that endless second-floor hallway, heart thundering so hard I thought my chest might crack. The lantern flame whipped violently, shadows leaping like claws from every warped corner. Every door I passed rattled, some gently, some so violently they seemed ready to burst open. And then I realized something crushing. The hallway didn't end. I swear to God I ran 30 seconds straight, boots pounding wood, each bone in my body screaming for the exit, and yet the staircase never came back into sight. The lodge was stretching. My lungs burned, my limbs screamed. Still, I kept moving until I spotted it, one single door at the very end. It wasn't like the rest, bigger, older, carved with symbols I couldn't place, spirals and claws, a sort of jagged sunburst. And unlike the others, it was wide open. A draft like a deep sigh pulled me in. Against every instinct begging me to stop, I stumbled closer, lantern raised. The room beyond was vast, much larger than the outside of the lodge could have ever contained. Its walls sloped high like a cathedral, rafters as black as pitch. In the center, arranged neatly in a wide circle, stood chairs, wooden, broken with age, but carefully placed. I counted 8. 7 of them were filled. At first, they looked like mannequins slumped in the chairs, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was worse. They were people, or had been. Shriveled, skin pulled tight to bone, hollow faces, every one of them frozen mid-expression. Not frozen from cold, but from fear. Mouths locked open, hands half raised as though trying to shield themselves. Their eyes were gone, sockets empty caves. I froze, gagging, bile rising, and then a sound slipped through the silence that nearly stopped my heart completely. The empty chair at the circle's edge scraped lightly across the wood floor, pulling back, slow and deliberate as though, for me. My boots turned without asking permission, hauling me backward. The lantern shook so badly my teeth clattered. But I swear, I didn't move fast enough because whispers filled the rafters again, whispers in my own voice. You belong here. The words tumbled over themselves, hundreds of versions at once, low, high, overlapping, pressing against my temples until I thought my skull might split. Each mannequin thing in the chairs began quivering as though waking, their slack mouths twitching, fingers jerking like puppets on strings. That broke me. Survival blasted all sense from me. I spun, sprinting through the doorway, hoping to retrace even one step. The lodge wasn't about to let me go easy. The hallway now warped completely. It tilted, slanted underfoot, boards shifting like teeth beneath me. Doors flew open as I passed, slamming shut just before I could glimpse what crouched behind them. My voice, my goddamn voice, chased me from all sides, overlapping chants of stay, stay, stay. I screamed without meaning to, just raw noise to drown it out. Somewhere ahead, through fog and shadow, I saw light, dim but true, a smear of silver daylight. I hurled myself toward it with every ounce of strength. And by something like a miracle, I crashed through. Snow exploded around me as I tumbled outside, rolling down a short drift and landing hard on my knees. For a moment, I just knelt there, panting clouds into the freezing night air. The fog had thinned, the forest stretched arrayed in real distance, and most importantly, the lodge sat silently behind me. But my blood iced when I turned to look. The windows, every single window, now glowed from within. Not lantern glow, not fire, a pale, frosted light. Behind each, faint silhouette stood still as stone. Figures lined the lodge inside, pressed against the glass. None moved, except one. Upstairs, centered in the largest window, was Bart me, or something molded into my shape. Leaning forward, slack-jawed grin stretching across its wrong face, watching me stagger away. That was when I finally did what I should have from the second I stepped inside. I ran. I don't remember much of the flight. My body turned feral, running until my knees ached and breath felt like broken glass. At some point I found my tent again, left in the first clearing. I didn't stop to pack. I shouldered what I had and left half my gear in the trees. Denali's wilderness became secondary. The only threat that mattered was behind me. It took 2 days of delirious trudging to find another human. A ranger heading back to a small outpost. I must have looked insane, rambling about a lodge that stretched and whispered. He nodded politely and told me there was no lodge anywhere near where I'd been. Maybe I saw ruins, maybe disorientation from fog. He didn't listen, not really. But I know what I saw. Here's the part that keeps me up. A week later, safe in Anchorage, I opened my pack to inventory what I still had. Buried between supplies I hadn't touched was something I swear I didn't collect. A splintered wooden shard, smooth at one end, the other carved with those same jagged sunburst patterns. A piece from one of those chairs, or one of those doors. It shouldn't have been there. Ever since, sometimes at night, I'll wake to my apartment bending with creaks and groans like weight is shifting above me. Once, sitting on my couch, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My hallway door handle twitching ever so slightly as though someone tested it. And worst of all, every now and then I'll hear footsteps out of sync with mine. Just a single echo too many. Like something followed me back. Like some part of me, the part that got left behind in that chair, wants to come home. To this day, I still take clients around Denali, but I will never, for any price, guide anyone near those woods where I found the lodge. Denali is vast, it hides countless things, and most people live and die without scratching its secrets. that's the lucky way. Because if you ever stumble on walls that shouldn't be there, carrying silence heavier than air, turn back. Don't step inside, because the Silent Lodge doesn't just want strangers wandering in, it wants duplicates walking out. If you've ever used a snowmobile in winter across the Alaskan bush, you know the sound. The howling growl of the engine ripping through frozen silence, echoing across the trees and ice. It's freedom, safety too. Out there, your sled is your lifeline. Without it, you freeze, you starve, or you vanish. I always felt invincible with the throttle pressed down, carving trails over white emptiness. Until that night outside of Kotzebue, when I realized even that snarling engine couldn't outrun what wanted us. It was winter 2020. My buddy Rick and I had planned a night ride out past the Kobuk Delta. He was obsessed with the thrill of speed, while I just liked the wild quiet. Headlights stretching across untouched snow, stars burning sharp in the frozen sky. We each rode our own sled, carrying packs strapped down with fuel, jerky, and an emergency tent. The air bit hard that night, 20 below, wind calm but needles of cold creeping into any gap you gave them. The headlights carved twin tunnels through the dark, our engines the only sound. We were maybe 20 miles out when I first saw it. Up ahead, something tall crossed the snow, just for a moment. At first I thought it was a moose, but the movement was wrong, too smooth, too fast. The thing loped across the snow without breaking stride, limbs oddly long vanishing into the tree line like smoke. I slowed my sled, raising a hand for Rick. "Did you see that?" I shouted over the engine. He shook his head, visor iced. "Moose," he called back, but my gut said no. Moose don't move like that. We kept on, but I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. My head kept flicking to the tree line along the flats, scanning shadows while the engine hummed heavy beneath me. A half hour later, we stopped to rest. Rick was digging out jerky, steam puffing from his mouth as he laughed at my nerves. I was fumbling with my thermos when I noticed something strange in our tracks. Two parallel lines cut by our sleds, clear in the pale moonlight, but alongside them, stitched into the snow like hunters' marks, were footprints. Only they weren't ours. They were massive, at least 20 inches long, each spread far apart. Whatever made them had been pacing us from the trees, keeping stride with machines racing 40 miles an hour. I crouched, brushing snow with a gloved hand, hoping I was imagining things, but the prints were unmistakable, long, narrow, clawed at the tips. Rick studied them, cursed low, then laughed too quickly. "Wolf has to be, but wolves don't make tracks shaped like elongated hands." We shoved off again. My sled growled, snow whipping around us, but the comfort of the engine was gone. Every twist of the throttle, every mile deeper in, something inside me screamed to turn back. That's when my sled sputtered. For a second, my stomach collapsed, thinking the fuel line was frozen. But the machine caught again, engine coughing, headlights flickering over the snow. Except, when the light stuttered back, I saw eyes. 10 yards in front of me, just off the trail, a cluster of pale blue orbs glared back. I slammed the brake, nearly throwing myself. The machine skidded to a halt, engine roaring like a desperate beast. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. And then, slowly, they rose. The thing stood from a crouch, towering over Rick's 6-foot sled in the beam's fringe. It had the body of a man stretched too far, skin pale like driftwood, joints bending wrong. Its mouth opened wide, but no sound came, just darkness behind cracked lips. I screamed Rick's name, but he was already gunning it, hauling past me. My sled jerked under me as I slammed the throttle in blind panic. The thing moved, and it was fast. The next 10 minutes were chaos seared across my brain, headlights shaking, snow flying into my visor, branches clawing past as I tore through the trees. The sled's engine howled, but so did something else, behind me. Not an animal's cry, not human either. A low guttural roar like air being torn sideways. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see nothing, to realize it was some nightmare trick. But no, it was there. bounding after us with leaps so long it barely touched the ground. Its limbs snapped forward like broken poles, fingertips digging into drifts to launch itself faster. Rick was ahead, his tail light a bouncing red dot in the endless black. I locked onto it like salvation, swerving to follow his track. But then the thing cut me off. It slammed through the trees, erupting to my right. Snow exploded ahead as its pale form lunged across the trail. I swerved instinctively, sled fishtailing, nearly throwing me, my chest hammered against the handlebars, headlights spilling sideways. When they hit the thing's face, its jaw unhinged wider, lips cracking open into a cavern. And inside that darkness, there were no teeth, just void. Pure, sucking void. I roared the throttle until my sled shook like it might tear apart. I lost sight of it as the forest swallowed us again. But every mile, every desperate scream of the engine, I felt it just steps behind. Like it didn't need to catch us tonight, it was just enjoying the chase. Finally, Rick slowed, jerking his sled off a ridge into a clearing. I pulled up beside him, choking on my own breath. He yanked off his helmet, face white as bleached bone. "You saw it too," I rasped, my body shaking so hard I thought my spine might crack. He didn't nod, didn't speak. He just stared back into the tree line. I followed his eyes. And there, just at the edge of the headlights, stood the thing, watching. Its arms dangled low, nearly dragging the snow, its head tilted like it was studying us. The void of its mouth gaped, then it crouched back, muscles coiled. It wasn't done. That crouch, it was like a spring coiling. Rick saw it too because he roared his sled to life before the thing could lunge. I didn't even think. My sled followed his, engines crying into the night as we tore out of that clearing like prey animals desperate for burrows. But that thing didn't need burrows, it needed shadows, and it had plenty. I stole a glance over my shoulder as the tree line streaked by. The glow of our headlights chased its tall figure, bounding between the trees at angles that should have snapped bone. Every time it landed, snow puffed up like geysers. It wasn't running beside us, it was hurting us. "Keep right," Rick shouted, his helmet crackling with his voice through the cold. I didn't argue. My throttle was pressed flat, wrists aching. The sled bucked over uneven terrain, the night exploding into a smear of white, black, and fear. Every swerve, I thought the skis would dig wrong and flip me. But flipping was a kinder fate. I could feel it behind us, laughing without sound, pulsing the air with its void of a mouth. We broke from the tree line, roaring across the flat tundra. The moon bared the snowfields, clear as glass. For a second, I thought being out here would help. We could lose it on the open. But then the true horror hit me. Its speed didn't falter on the flats. It thrived out there. Across the glittering white, its massive form sprinted in wide arcs around us, body low, limbs snapping forward like spider legs. Every blink, it was somewhere else. Our left, our right, ahead, behind. The void mouth gaped wider every time our headlights caught it, as if it were feeding on the fear. Rick veered sharp, heading toward a sunken gulch ahead, a dried riverbed cutting through the tundra. He aimed straight for it, launching his sled down the slope, snow spraying in a blizzard behind him. I gritted my teeth and followed. The sleds groaned under the impact as we landed hard at the basin's bottom. The gulch carved a natural path, two sheer walls of ice and packed snow on either side. Rick's plan clicked, no room for it to flank us. But no plan lasts forever. The sound came first, metal on ice, a scratching like claws dragging overhead. I craned my neck just as my headlights swept the gulch's ridge, and there it was, running. On all fours. It skittered across the rim far above us, enormous arms bent at wrong angles, claws gouging icy stone. It matched our speed without effort, head rolling from side to side as if listening to the roar of our sleds. Rick swerved left at a fork, and I only just managed to yank my machine after him. But as I looked up again, the ridge was empty. Not gone, just waiting. The next second proved it. It came down. Like a meteor of pale flesh, it plunged from the rim, slamming into the gulch floor behind me. The impact made my sled bounce up, treads screaming on the ice. I didn't dare look back, but I didn't have to. The vibrations in the frozen ground told me it was on my trail, close enough for its shadow to stretch into the corner of my headlights, close enough for the engine's scream to fight with something even louder, the cracking snarl erupting from its void mouth. I thought that was it. Game over. But Rick saved my life. He jerked his sled hard sideways, cut speed, then peeled back across the gulch to flank the thing. I only caught it in fragments through sprays of snow, but I realized what he was doing. He skimmed past its side, baiting it, then gunned forward again. He was pulling it off of me. It worked, but it cost him. The beast shifted, bounding toward his red taillight. In 2 leaps, it was nearly on him. I screamed into my helmet, trying to close the distance, but the thing was too fast. It was playing with him now, batting toward his sled, claws raking lines across the snow, trailing just far enough back that Rick knew he was one flick of fate away from being gutted. And then, crueler still, it let him go. We burst out of the gulch, back onto the open flats again, sleds rattling from the impact. The thing didn't follow, not visibly, it simply stopped. Standing at the ridge we just left, body looming against the moonlight, a silhouette of stretched arms and void mouth, it watched. Rick slowed, finally letting his sled idle as he gasped into the mic. "Why is it not chasing?" "Don't stop," I yelled. He did anyway. We sat there, engines burbling, eyes fixed back on that ridge. The thing didn't move, it just stood. And slowly, it lifted one long arm. It pointed, down at us. That was the final straw. Rick cursed loud enough to crack his mic, spun the sled, and we tore back for civilization like hunted dogs. We didn't speak another word until lights finally shimmered on the horizon. Kotzebue's small outpost glow. We made it back, alive, physically anyway. But here's the truth, even now, even sitting in the comfort of my home telling you this story, I don't feel safe. Because when we pulled up to Rick's shed that night, shoving the sleds inside, I noticed something that still wakes me up in sweats. On the metal pan of my snowmobile, long grooves had been dragged into the steel, 5 of them, deep as if a bear had clenched it, but they were narrow, precise, gouged with intent, like claws. Rick won't talk about it at all anymore. He sold his sled, won't set foot on snow. Me, I still ride. You can't live up here and not. But there's never a night ride now, only day. And even then, as my engine screams across the flats, I sometimes see shapes in the tree line, pale shadows, keeping pace no matter how fast I go. The sled is supposed to be your lifeline, but what saved us once? I think it only made it hungrier. Because now I know, no matter how loud an engine roars across Alaskan snow, you can still hear what stalks you. You'd be surprised how often people vanish in Alaska. The land swallows them. Planes disappear off radars. Hunters never come home. Snowstorms bury trails, and you're left with no answers, just names whispered in towns for years after. Back in 2012, I stumbled on something out there that still haunts me. A frozen camp, a place that shouldn't exist. It started with my job. I was part of a cleanup crew in the interior, hired to monitor abandoned mining sites and old prospecting trails. Basically, we were glorified janitors for the wilderness, making sure people hadn't dumped chemicals into water streams or left rusted equipment for wildlife to get hurt on. One February, I was paired with a guy named Joel. Quiet, chain smoker, the type who'd been out here too long, if you know what I mean. His eyes never seemed fully here, but he knew the land better than anyone. We had snowmobiles, sleds of supplies, and a week to log data, or that was the plan. On the 3rd day, we cut cross-country after spotting strange markers poking out of the drifts. Stacks of stone, taller than a man. At first, we thought they were Inuksut, traditional Inuit cairns meant to mark paths or hunting spots. But these weren't built like that. They leaned at odd angles, stones stacked awkwardly but with precision, as though someone wanted them unstable. One topple away from collapse. Joel stared at one for a long minute, said nothing, then muttered, Let's not linger. But as I glanced past, I swore I saw something dark half buried in the snow beyond. Joel must have seen it too because he sped his sled forward. We crested a drift, and what lay on the other side froze both of us in place. A camp. That alone wasn't strange. Trappers, miners, surveyors, plenty of people set up remote camps. What was strange was, this one looked old. Not decades, centuries. Half a dozen canvas tents drooped under the set. Now pack, their poles iced so solid they looked fossilized. A circle of logs still sat neatly arranged around a fire pit that was packed with solid ice. Tools speared the ground. Axes, a rusted saw, a bent rifle that shouldn't have been any younger than the late 1800s. More shocking than all that, footprints. Dozens of them, circling around the camp. Not fresh, but the snowfall hadn't erased them either, as though they had pressed so deep into the ice they'd stayed preserved. Some boot prints, some bare feet, and most of them didn't lead away. They just ended around the campfire. My whole body prickled with gooseflesh even through padded layers. Joel muttered, "Nobody's been here," but his voice carried nothing like certainty. We walked the site slowly, sleds parked at the edge of the clearing. My boots crunched as I circled one of the tents. The canvas was stiff, brittle, like touching old paper. When I peeked inside, my stomach climbed into my throat. A skeleton. It sat upright, knees folded toward its chest, clothing still clinging to yellowed bones. Whatever fabric had been a parka was torn, but perfectly frozen in place. The skull tilted to the side, teeth bared in a way that almost looked like a scream locked mid-breath. I stumbled back, voice cracking. "There's someone in here." Joel didn't even look. He just lit another cigarette with shaking hands. "We're leaving," he muttered. But I couldn't stop. Morbid curiosity dragged me deeper. In another tent, I found two more shapes, bodies, or what was left of them. Not skeletons exactly, still flesh but dry, mummified by the cold. Their hands looked mangled, nails cracked down to bleeding quick. It was as if the people in that camp had clawed and clawed, trying to get out of something that hadn't let them. We should have left then. But my eyes kept being dragged back to the footprints circling the frozen fire pit. The more I stared, the less natural they seemed. Some were boots with worn soles. Others were bare, toes splayed as if people stood barefoot in sub-zero cold. But one print, God help me, was not human. It had too many toes, 6, maybe 7, long curling imprints where claws must have dug deep into the ice. When I pointed it out, Joel stomped his boot over it immediately and glared at me with more anger than I thought possible from him. "Don't," he snapped. His voice was tight, higher pitched, like he was trying not to let something slip. "Do you know this place?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just kicked snow over the rest of the prints with jerky movements and hissed, "Mount up, now." By the time we strapped back onto the snowmobiles, the air had changed. Colder. Too still. Even the engines seemed quieter as we gunned them back the way we'd come. But there's no silence in Alaska that isn't hiding something. The first sound broke just 5 minutes later, a sharp crack like splitting ice. Joel froze mid-ride, pulling up fast. I skidded my sled alongside his and lifted my visor. "What?" I shouted. He just stared at the trees. "We aren't alone." I wanted to argue, but then I heard it too. Footsteps crunching behind us. At first, I told myself it was echo from our sleds bouncing from the ice. But when we cut the engines, the sound kept going. Heavy crunch after crunch, deliberate as if whatever was back there didn't care if we heard. Joel's cigarette dangled, forgotten from his lips. His hand trembled badly on the sled's throttle. Then he whispered, "It followed us." The silence collapsed around me. I realized every hair on my neck was standing and my instincts screamed at me not to look back. But of course I did. And about 100 yards back, across to stark white emptiness, I saw them. Not one shape, several. Dark figures, half shrouded by blowing snow, trudging toward us in uneven lines. Their gaits were jerky, off balance, some dragging limbs, others too stiff. Each carried the faintest trail of frost in their wake, like the cold itself bled from their bodies. But the one in front made me drop my visor out of pure reflex. It was tall, too tall, hood hanging loose from a parka rotted near to threads. And where its face should have been, Only black pit hollows screamed through the drift. Joel shouted, "Go!" at the top of his lungs. We tore away without a second thought, sleds spraying snow behind us like waves. I gripped the handlebars till my knuckles bled under the gloves, but inside, I already knew. That wasn't the last I'd see of that frozen camp or its hunters. Our snowmobiles screamed across the flats, engines howling like scared animals. We didn't talk, didn't look back, just raw flight. But the most terrifying part wasn't the speed or the storm of powder under our skis. It was the sound above the engines. Footsteps. They didn't fade. Even at full throttle, over 50 miles an hour, I could hear them crunching the snow behind us at the exact same tempo. Never closer, never farther, like they wanted us to know they could keep pace forever if they wanted. I risked a glance. My visor iced over, headlights bouncing, but I still saw them. The figures were right there across the white, striding through powder like it was thin air. Each hunched, twisted shape flickered in and out between blasts of snow. The tall leader was always at the front, its pit face pointed directly at me, never at Joel, always watching me. Joel must have realized the same, because after 10 endless minutes of riding, he suddenly cut his sled left, veering toward a line of spruce. I nearly flipped trying to follow. We tore between trunks, headlights strobing shadow and snow. The machines bucked and growled, but the woods slowed us down. For a second, I thought maybe the trees will break line of sight, maybe we can lose them here. Then, snap. A tree to our right cracked in half. Just as we shot past, one of the figures smashed through it like balsa wood, showering the snow with splinters. Joel jerked his handlebars in panic, sled skidding so hard he barely caught it. "They're in the trees!" I screamed, voice lost under the engine. Joel didn't respond, just gunned harder. We broke out of the spruce a mile later, stumbled onto an old trapper's supply hut half buried in ice. Joel pulled hard, parking his sled behind it. I followed, tearing my helmet off and gasping frost. "What the hell are they?" I barked. His face was gray, dripping sweat that froze into icicles instantly. He fumbled for his cigarettes, but his hand shook too badly to light one. Finally, he muttered, "I told you, that camp shouldn't exist." "What do you mean?" I pressed, refusing to blink lest something moved in the dark around us. And then Joel told me. He said old-timers up here whisper about the camps, places not on maps, not on records, sites where entire prospecting crews, trapping groups, sometimes even families stopped, but never left. Always found with tents still standing, food still frozen, fires snuffed mid-spark. Nobody ever found tracks leading away, just those who stayed. And always, always the footprints circling the campfires. "Something called him," Joel said. "Something kept him." I swallowed so hard it hurt. "And we found one." He nodded. "Once you've been to a camp, you don't shake it. It follows. Men suias. Or they see the dead walking after, like dolls dragged through the snow." His voice cracked. "I've seen it before." That silenced me. A crunch snapped us both to attention. Deep, deliberate, close. We plastered backs to the cabin wall, flashlights shakily drawn, beams spearing the wind-whipped snow. My heart was hammering, my ribs raw. The sound came again, footsteps circling the hut this time. First one side, then the back, then the far edge, always just out of sight. Joel whispered, "Don't let him see fear." He gritted his teeth against the useless lighter, hands shaking. "That's what they chew on." But I couldn't help it. My breath rasped fast, fogging the frozen air in ragged bursts, and I knew they could hear it, because the crunching stopped. The silence was enormous, bigger than Denali, and then a long dragging sound across the roof like claws raking wood. We bolted, no plan, no thought, just pure panic. We fired up the sleds, engines screaming alive, and shot back into the flats. Behind us, something crashed from the hut roof into the snow. I didn't look. I just hammered the throttle until my sled howled like death. We rode for 2 straight hours until shadows shifted and faint lights began to glow through the dust of snow, the edge of Ambler Village, civilization. the first sign of human safety we'd seen since spotting the camp. When we finally stumbled into town, trembling and white-faced, locals stared. I wanted to explain, but Joel shut me down fast. He leaned close, whispered sharp, "Don't. You breathe life into them with words." And that was that. Here's the worst part. A week later, back in Fairbanks, I unpacked my gear. I expected nightmares, shaking hands, maybe some frost damage on my sled. What I didn't expect was the glove. Inside my bag, resting neatly atop folded layers, was a single cracked leather glove, stiff, ancient, torn at the palm, much too old to be mine. But worse, it was still wet, as if it had just been pulled from the snow. Joel quit the job after that, vanished without goodbyes. Some say he moved further north. Others whisper he went back with them. Me, I can't shake it. Every winter when I'm out by myself on the tundra, the sounds creep up again. My sled will rumble under me, the horizon stretching endless, and then crunch, crunch, footsteps pacing alongside me. I know better than to look now, but that doesn't save me, because one night just outside Bettles, I killed the engine to check my bearings, and the sound didn't stop. The footsteps kept going, circling me, just like in the camp. The scariest question isn't what happened to those people. It's not even what the figures are. It's this. How many camps are there still buried under Alaskan snow, waiting? If you ask an Alaskan what sound terrifies them most, surprisingly, it's not the wolf howl or the crash of a bear storming your camp. It's the cracks of ice splitting beneath you, echoing for miles under a vast frozen surface. One wrong step, one unlucky minute too late, and the river swallows you. Up here, falling through ice usually means death, not quickly either. But I learned that something else lives under the frozen rivers, something more patient and cruel than the cold itself. This happened in the winter of 2019. I was running trap lines with a longtime friend, Eddie, out on the Yukon River. Our sleds dragged behind us with supplies and firewood. It was bitterly cold, air too sharp to even breathe deep. We'd been at it days already, tired but comfortable. Then we saw it. Evidence of an old fish camp frozen into the riverbank, half collapsed into the drifts. We set up nearby for the night. The frozen Yukon stretched wide like a silver sheet, moonlight cracking over the frozen crust. I don't know why, but it made me uneasy. Eddie was half asleep before I even got the fire properly going. That left me listening too long and too hard to the hollow silence. That was the first time I heard it. A voice. Faint, muffled, like someone far away talking through a wall. I thought it was Eddie muttering in his sleep at first, but as I tilted my head, leaning at the silent river, I realized it wasn't coming from the tent. It was coming from beneath the ice. My stomach dropped. At first, I convinced myself it was the current or shifting ice groaning, but slowly, undeniably, it sharpened into recognizable syllables, words. Help. Please. The whisper clawed its way through the frozen shell, soft but distinct. I froze, staring at the river, lit silver by the moon. Nobody should have been under there, not in that black pool of water rushing miles beneath. It should have been impossible. And yet, I swear on my life I heard it. Please, help me. It was the voice of a man, weak, pained, but clear. I rushed into the tent, shaking Eddie awake. "Do you hear that?" I hissed. He blinked at me, dazed, then cursed about the cold. "What the hell are you talking about?" I dragged him outside, shoving him toward the river. The voice was quieter then, maybe pausing. Eddie listened for a long minute, then shook his head with irritation. "All I hear is ice shifting, freaking currents." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You're spooked. Get some sleep." But I couldn't. I sat up half the night by the fire, staring at the river, my body locked between dread and curiosity. At one point, I swear I heard a new voice, higher pitched, a woman's, faint, whimpering. But whenever I dragged Eddie out, they went silent, dead quiet, as though they knew he wouldn't listen. Morning brought no peace. While breaking down the camp, Eddie noticed I hadn't slept. He laughed it off as nerves. "Maybe you got frostbite in your ears," he joked. But when I glanced back toward the riverbank, I saw something that almost made me scream. Hands. Two pale, frozen hands pressed upward just beneath the ice. Splayed fingers, blue-white and rigid, trapped under a cloud of air pocket. The nails clawed against the frozen crust, though no sound came. I shouted for Eddie, ran onto the river, slid on my knees and smacked the ice with my mitts. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just clear, solid ice, no hands, only the distorted rocks lying at the bottom. Eddie barked laughter from the bank. He thought I'd gone insane, but I knew what I saw. That day, I couldn't keep my head straight. At every stop along the line, I swore the voices whispered beneath my boots on the river crossings. Not words anymore, not clearly, but broken syllables, scattered moans that drifted upward. By sunset, the sound had changed. It wasn't weak whispers anymore. It was laughter, and it was following me. Eddie finally snapped when I refused to set camp on the ice that night, made him move farther inland up against the trees. He grumbled the whole way, but I didn't care. The thought of sleeping over that river made my bones scream. So we camped where the ground was firm. And yet, that night, well after Eddie began snoring, the laughter came again. I sat bolt upright in the tent, ice in my veins. It wasn't faint anymore. It wasn't muffled. It was clear. It came from just outside. "Come down." The voice was wet, dragging the words as though choking through water. "Come see." My heart hammered. I gripped the hatchet inside my sleeping bag, whispering prayers I hadn't said since I was a kid. I wanted to shake Eddie awake, but terror locked my body. Then, after a silence so suffocating I thought my chest might stop, came the final word. "Thirsty." By dawn, I was a wreck. Dry-eyed, ribs sore from tensing all night. Eddie cracked jokes about me being a city boy lost in the woods, even though I'd been born and raised in Alaska. But his smile didn't last. Not when he saw the tracks. They circled the tent. Not animal tracks, not human either. They were long gouges, 5 deep lines like fingers, each set pressed an inch into the snow, leading directly to where my side of the tent was, then straight back to the river. I didn't say a word, neither did he. By the third night, Eddie could hear it too. We'd stopped to repair some gear, sitting with our backs to the sleds when his face suddenly drained of all blood. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You hear that?" It bubbled up from beneath the frozen floe, slipping through the crust like seepage. Moans, wet, unsteady human moans. I stared at him, waiting for him to crack a smile, to play a prank. He didn't. His cigarette trembled between his lips, ash spilling onto his jacket. Finally, he muttered, "We have to get off this river." But we didn't, because the storm pinned us in, sled engines locked up with ice, tents buried, no way out but to wait it out, all while the voices below grew louder, clearer. And I swear by the 4th day, we weren't just hearing them anymore. We were seeing them. The 4th night broke everything. By then, Eddie was hearing the voices as clearly as me. It changed him, took the laughter out of him, dulled his tough guy smirk. He stopped smoking, stopped talking altogether, just sat there by the fire, eyes locked on the black river rolling under sheets of ice, listening. The storm howled itself bald overhead, ripping our tents and slapping frost into our faces, but still the voices cut through, louder every hour, sometimes begging, sometimes screaming, other times laughing like drunks sitting right under the surface. What stripped my soul bare was this: I started recognizing them. One night, I heard my father's voice, clear as day, even though he died years back in Anchorage. He muttered things he used to say around the dinner table. Then came the voice of Maggie, my kid sister, but she was alive, waiting for me back in town. That's when I realized they weren't calling with strangers' voices anymore. They were calling with ours. By the 5th night, Eddie cracked. I woke up to the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. His. I bolted out of the tent and saw him half a football field away, staggering across the river's crust with nothing on but boots and his undershirt. His silhouette bent low, like he was leaning down to listen. "Eddie!" I screamed at Raw, voice shredding against the storm. But he didn't turn. When I caught him, he was kneeling on the ice, hands pressed flat, face lowered, his breath fogging the surface. To my horror, he was whispering back. I grabbed his shoulders, shouting in his face. His eyes were glazed, wide, streaming tears that froze on his cheeks. "They're so close," he rasped. "They're trapped. We gotta help." And then the ice spidered beneath him, long veins cracking outward from his knees. I yanked him back with every ounce of panic-born strength. The surface groaned like an animal. A black slosh gurgled beneath the ice where lines had split. For one gut-crushing moment, I swore I saw fingers clawing upward from the cracks, blind and frantic. We scrambled back to shore on hands and knees, half crawling, half sobbing like kids. The next day we tried to leave, packed fast, slammed gear together onto sleds, prayed they'd run. But Eddie's machine wouldn't start. Not fuel, not frost, nothing. Dead. He slumped to the snow, whispering again. I screamed at him to help me double-load one sled. He looked at me slowly, too slowly, and said, "If you want to leave, go. I'm staying. They're waiting." I'd never seen a man give up so fast, so absolutely. His body was there, but his soul was already under that river. So I left. I strapped what I could onto my sled, gunned the engine till it screamed, and tore off into the storm. I rode blind half the time, trees scraping both sides, the Yukon groaning alongside me like a graveyard full of rotten wood. But even miles away, the voices trailed underneath me, rising through the earth itself. When I finally broke out at a ranger station near Galena 3 days later, I was barely standing. The ranger found me shaking, hypothermic, mumbling about voices in the river. He thought I was delirious. After a couple of days' rest, I begged him to send someone for Eddie. Weeks later, searchers went. They found our camp, both sleds. My sled still had half my gear on it, but not Eddie, not even a body. What they did find chilled every drop of blood I had left. Out in the middle of the Yukon, there was a hole in the ice, perfect circle, as though cut, not cracked. Around its rim, bare handprints had frozen in, palms downward, digging inward, like someone had lowered himself happily, willingly, through. No climb marks, no signs he ever came back out. That was 4 years ago. On good days, I tell myself my friend slipped, cut through by weak ice, lost to the current like so many others in this state. But then some nights, I'll wake to a sound, not from the road, not from neighbors, from below. Through the floorboards, faint at first, then clearer. A voice gurgling like water bubbling past rocks, and every time it grows stronger until my whole bedroom seems to hum with it. And what cuts my marrow in two is that it isn't strange voices anymore. It's Eddie's. "Come back," it moans. "It's warm here." Sometimes it laughs, sometimes it cries, but it always calls me by name, always. And lately, I've started to hear something worse, a crackling, wet chorus behind him, dozens layered together, maybe hundreds, each one thirsty. The Yukon River stretches for nearly 2,000 miles, unfathomable depth, eerie silence under its frozen skin. And somewhere beneath it all, I think there's a grave that isn't full yet. That's the end of our journey into Alaska's frozen wilderness. 6 stories pulled from the shadows where silence carries secrets and the snow never covers everything. From the cabin with no windows, to the lights that lured on the Kobuk, to the voice that still moans beneath the ice, the countryside up here can feel endless, but so can what's hiding in it. Maybe that's the scariest truth of all. In Alaska, you're never really alone, even when you should be. So tell me, which story chilled you the most? Drop your answer in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories.